Okay, there we go. All right, so here we go. Our first video before we go into our first lab. Actually, it's useful. We're going to probably watch another video before we do our lab. But here we go, Task Manager.
In this demonstration, we're going to spend some time working with Task Manager on Windows. Task Manager is an extremely useful Windows utility. It's great for monitoring and troubleshooting the Windows system. It allows you to monitor system performance. It allows you to manage applications and processes running on the system. It also allows you to manage startup tasks. There are several different ways that you can load Task Manager on Windows. One way is to come down to the taskbar, right-click, and then select Task Manager from the pop-up window that's displayed. You can also open Task Manager by pressing Ctrl-Alt-Delete at the same time. When you do, a screen will be displayed. One of the options there will be to start Task Manager. Another option is to come over to your search window and type Task Manager in the search field. Then click Task Manager from the search results. When you open Task Manager, you'll notice that it initially loads by default with a low detail view displayed. There's not a whole lot you can do in this view. Probably the thing that this view is used for most is to kill a hung up app. Say you're using an application on Windows and it stopped responding. It's hung. You can't get out of it using the normal methods like clicking File, Exit, or clicking the X in the top right corner of the app. You can come into Task Manager, select that misbehaving application, and then come down here and click End Task. Notice that I have 3 applications currently running: Microsoft Edge web browser, Notepad, and Paint. Let's suppose that Paint is misbehaving for some reason. It's hung up and I cannot close it. I can click it and then click End Task. Then the Paint application is closed. There are a few other things you can do in this view which are probably not used as often. For example, I can right-click an application and then click Always on Top. That will bring the application to the top of the screen. You can also right-click it and click End Task, which is the same as coming down here and clicking End Task. There's another useful option here that doesn't get used very often. It's one that can be very useful in situations where you have an application listed here and you don't know what it is. You're not sure who started it or what it does. You can come down here and click Search Online. In this case, an internet search will be conducted for the name of that application, and information will be displayed in the search results. This can be a very useful tool for identifying malware that might be running on your system. You can come down here, click Properties, and the properties of the executable file will be launched. I'll go ahead and click out of there. Notice down here there's an option called More Details, and frankly, that's the option that I usually use with Task Manager. The low detail view that we're looking at right now is really designed mostly for the user, while the high detail view is what's used for system administrators. And that's where we're going to spend most of our time in this demonstration. Notice that when we access the high detail view, several different tabs are displayed. We have Processes, Performance, App History, Startup, Users, Detail, and Services. Let's start with the Processes tab. Remember when we were looking at the low detail view, we saw that Microsoft Edge web browser and Notepad were both listed as running applications on the system. When we switch to the high detail view, we see those applications on the Processes tab, but we also see a lot of other things that are running on the system that we did not see in the low detail view. For example, we see the Task Manager application itself, which is providing this interface that we're looking at right now. And we also see a whole bunch of background processes that are running on the system that we did not see in the low detail view. For each process or application running on the system, you can view summary statistics about that application or process, such as its name and its current status. You can view CPU utilization statistics for that application. As you can see here, Notepad is currently not using any CPU utilization. You can see how much physical memory the application is currently using. You can see that Notepad is using very little system memory. You can also see the disk utilization. In this case, Notepad is neither writing to nor reading from the hard disk drive, and so 0 is listed over here. If the application is communicating with another host over the network, then you'll be able to also view how much network bandwidth it is using. Now, Notepad does not communicate with other systems over the network, so it currently uses 0 megabits of network. You'll also notice up at the top of each column, you can see view system-wide statistics for each of these different columns. Notice that our CPU utilization overall is around 2%. Currently, 66% of our physical system RAM is in use by processes running on the system. Right now, not a whole lot's going on with the hard disk drive. No processes are writing to or reading from the disk. And likewise, no processes or applications are communicating with other hosts over the network. You'll notice in the high detail view of Task Manager that several of the same options that we saw in the low detail view are also available. For example, the End Task button. I have a task running here that is hung that I want to close. I can select it, then come down here, click End Task, and it is closed. If I right-click the application, I can choose Go to Details, which takes us to the same information that we can find up here on the Details tab. The Details tab lists detailed information about all the processes running on the system, unlike the Processes tab that lists a high-level view of the processes. If I look down here at Microsoft Edge.exe, I can see more details than what I see on the Processes tab. In addition to processes, Task Manager also provides the Performance tab. This is a great way to monitor the overall usage of resources on the system. You can view stats for CPU, for memory, for disk I/O, and for network I/O. Let's go back up here to CPU. The information that you see on this tab is basically the same information that we saw over here in the headings of each of these columns. The advantage is there's more details provided over here on the Performance tab. Over here is a graph that will display a brief history of activity for that particular statistic. In this case, CPU utilization. You can view similar information for memory. You can see how much memory is currently being used. You can see the detailed statistics down here, such as how much is in use and how much is available. We can do the same thing for our hard disk. This screen allows us to see how hard our hard disk drive is being used in the system. The same is true for our network adapter. You can see how much data has been sent and how much data has been received. If we come over to the next tab, App History, we can view information about Windows Store applications that have been installed on the system. This tab displays information only for Windows Store apps. It does not display information about desktop apps on the system. For each Windows Store app, you can see how much CPU time each of these apps has consumed. We can see how much network they have transmitted or received over the network connection. The Metered Network tab is really interesting because it will tell you how much of this network I/O over here in this column was done on a metered network. This would be useful in situations where you have a mobile device where Windows is installed and you have a metered connection on that device, where basically you have to pay for how much bandwidth you use, or maybe you have a bandwidth cap. This will tell you how much of that metered network bandwidth an app is using. Over here under Tile Update, it will tell you how much data was transferred over the network connection, just to keep your live tiles updated. Now, for the most part, this tab is of most use on mobile devices, either a tablet system, a phone, or a notebook system. If I have a whole bunch of Windows Store apps installed on this system, and I've got some that are using a little bit of CPU time, well, that could potentially drain my battery on that system. I would have to look at those and decide if I really need them on the system. If I'm going to conserve my battery and make it last as long as I can, then maybe I want to uninstall some of these apps that are consuming a lot of CPU time. Same over here with metered network. Maybe I've got an app running here that consumes a lot of metered network bandwidth. It's costing me money, and again, maybe that's one I need to uninstall. The same holds true when evaluating the live tiles that might be associated with a particular Windows Store app. Another tab that's provided in Task Manager that I think is extremely useful is the Startup tab. The Startup tab identifies apps that are going to be launched by default when the system initially boots up. If you have a system that is having trouble at system boot, or maybe it's just taking a long time to boot, you can come over here to the Startup tab and see what applications are being loaded when the system initially boots. You can decide whether you actually need these or not. This is a big problem because a lot of applications on Windows will add a startup app by default when you install it. An app may not even tell you that it's doing it. The idea is the startup app preloads a lot of the code required for that particular application to run. When you do run the app on the system, it boots up really fast and you think, wow, what a great application. Those guys really knew what they were doing, when in fact, all they were doing is preloading a lot of stuff when the system booted up. Maybe you don't need all that stuff running, especially if you're working with an application that is used only every now and then. In that situation, you can come over to an application, right-click it, and click Disable. Notice that when I do that, its status is changed to disabled. The next time I boot the system, this particular startup app will not be loaded. Very useful for troubleshooting startup problems. Be aware that in previous versions of Windows, startup was located under the msconfig utility. The Users tab displays all of the users who are currently logged into the system. You can see for a given user how much CPU time their processes are consuming and how much physical memory the processes associated with that user are using. Same with disk and network I/O. If you expand the user, you can see a list of all the processes that are owned by that particular user account. If for some reason you don't want that user logged in, you can come down here to the disconnect button and disconnect the user from the system. Let's go over to the Details tab. This is the tab where I spend most of my time when I'm using Task Manager on a Windows system. Basically, the information displayed here on the Details tab is the same information that was displayed in the Processes tab in older versions of Task Manager. For each process running on the system, we have the name of the process, its process ID number, its current status, the name of the user that owns that process, how much CPU utilization that process is using, how much physical memory that process is using, and also a description of that process. These are the default columns. You can right-click the column heading, such as this one, and then click Select Columns. You can see a list of all the other columns that you can add. One of the things you can do in the Details tab that you cannot do on the Processes tab is to set the priority of the process. Notice right here that by default it's set to normal, which means it's not considered any more important than any other process running on the system. But if you have a process that is more important than the other processes running on the system, you can increase its priority by setting it to above normal, high, or even to real time. For example, maybe I have a video editing process running on my system, and I want to reserve more CPU time for that video editing process while it's rendering a video clip. To do this, I'll come into the Details tab, select its process, and then maybe set its priority to above normal. I could also set it to below normal or set it to low. You can also set the affinity for that process by clicking Set Affinity. This will specify which processor you want this process to run on. I have only one processor in the system, but if I had multiple processors, I could choose a processor that I wanted that application to run on. The last thing we're going to look at in this demonstration is the Services tab. The Services tab allows you to manage the various services that are running on the system. Remember, a service runs in the background. It usually does not have any kind of user interface, and it's used to provide the various services that the system needs to get up and running. This interface allows you some limited management functions for the services running on the system. For example, right here we have the print spooler. This is the service that allows you to send print jobs to a printer connected to the system. On occasion, you may need to restart the print spooler process. Maybe you need to clean out some print jobs that are stuck in the queue or something like that. In this case, you can right-click the service, and then you can come down here and either stop the service altogether, or you can also restart it. The last thing I want to point out is the fact that while Task Manager is a good tool for monitoring system performance, it's not the best tool. If you need a lot more detail about the performance of the system and how your hardware resources are being utilized in the system, then you can come to the Performance tab and click Open Resource Monitor to launch the Resource Monitor application. That's it for this demonstration. In this demo, we talked about how to use Task Manager on a Windows system. We first looked at the low detail view in Task Manager, and then we looked at the high detail view. And we reviewed the information that could be accessed on the Processes, Performance, App History, Startup, Users, Details, and Services tabs.
All right. I know that's a lot of information. I would definitely recommend just navigating to the Task Manager. Check out some of the tabs. Check out specifically on your own system. If you're having performance issues, check out what's in that Startup tab, because that'll help you tremendously. So, are there any questions about the Task Manager? You'll definitely see that on certification. So I would definitely review that if you need to. All right. So before we get into our labs, I do want to show you one more video. I'm going to overwhelm you with videos to start. Well, just two. This one is useful because we are going to actually go into the shell and do some command line changes on our system. So, and if you've never experienced with PowerShell, the Windows shell product, very similar to Unix or Linux, then yes, this will definitely be useful information. So here we go. And this video is 12.1.11.
In this demonstration, we're going to practice using system commands at the command prompt. These commands that we're going to look at are not your average user commands. These are commands typically used only by system administrators. To begin, we do need to open a command prompt. Most of the commands we're going to use need to be run as administrator. So what I'm going to do is come down to Start, scroll down to the Windows system, right-click Command Prompt, select More, and Run as Administrator. I can also open this by typing Command Prompt in the search box, right-click and select Run as Administrator. I get a user account control prompt. I'll click Yes and Continue. To make things a bit easier to see and read, I'm going to customize this window just a little. I do that by right-clicking on the menu.
Actually, I don't want to go into command prompts. Sorry about that. Because our lab is on PowerShell. So let me search a little bit on here.
What's the difference from PowerShell and command prompt?
It's quite a, well, very, very good question. PowerShell, you can run more what we call shell commands, more system control. Well, to be honest, is at our level, at a system admin level, there's not a big difference, but PowerShell will do a lot more for you as a system admin, and that's generally the difference.
So would it lean more like automation?
And you can write scripts and run them in PowerShell. You can on the command prompt, but it's quite a bit harder. You actually have to load a specific engine in the back end to run it on the command prompt. So let me see. But technically, as far as the commands, which are based on the old Unix, they're all essentially the same. There's some slightly different commands in PowerShell, but and maybe I should. Well, let me just search here for a second. Maybe I'll run this one, maybe not. We'll see. Actually, I don't think we have one on PowerShell. All right, so let's just continue. This will be useful as we go into the lab. All right. All right.
Menu bar and selecting Properties. I'm going to go to the Font tab and bump the font up to 20. Now I'm going to adjust the color of my text by going to the Colors tab. From there, I will select Screen Text and choose white rather than the default gray color. This will make it a bit easier to see the screen. Now let's adjust the window size a little bit. The first thing I want to point out is the fact that if you're having trouble with a command, or if you just need to learn how to use a particular command, you have two options for getting help at the command line. The first option, and the one that I use most, is to simply enter the name of the command, such as dir. The dir command is a command we use to generate a listing of files and folders in a directory we specify. We type dir / and press enter. Instead of running, dir displays its help screen. As you can see here, dir displays a list of files and subdirectories within a directory. Then helps show us the syntax for using the dir command and all the different options we can use with it. In addition to using the / and ? To view the help for a given command, you can use the help command to get help for most Windows commands. You type help, space, and then the name of the command that you want to get help for. Let's get help for the dir command again, and the same screen is displayed. So with this in mind, let's look at some of the administrative commands that you can use at the command prompt. The first command I want to show you is the command used to exit out of the command line environment. It's simply the exit command. You have a couple of options for closing the command prompt window. You can come up here and click the X, or you can type exit and press enter and the window will close. I'm not going to exit out of this right now. Now, another command that's very useful is the shutdown command. Let's take a look at the help screen for shutdown. As its name implies, shutdown is used to shut down the system. The syntax is to enter shutdown followed by an option specifying what type of shutdown you want to complete. For example, the /I option here displays the graphical user interface for the shutdown command. Let's go ahead and try that out. I'm going to open up a second command prompt here. Let's type shutdown /I, and the remote shutdown dialog is displayed. Here I can specify which computer it is I want to shut down. This is kind of cool. With this remote shutdown dialog, I can not only shut down the local computer here that I'm working on, but I can also connect to other computers on the network and shut them down as well. I can also add computers on the network and shut them all down at the same time. Down here, I can specify what it is I want to use those computers to do. I can either restart them and shut them down. I can also warn users that the system is about to be shut down to give them a 30-second warning, so they have time to save their work and log out. I can come down here and specify why I'm shutting the system down. I can select a reason and add a comment explaining why I'm shutting the system down. Let's go ahead and click cancel. I can accomplish those same tasks from the command prompt without using the graphical user interface. For example, notice here that we can use the /L option to just log off without shutting the system down. Just log off my local user account. I can use the /R to do a full shutdown and then restart the computer. I can use /H to hibernate the computer. Down here with the /T option, I can set a timeout period before the shutdown occurs. Again, this is a good idea if you have lots of people using the computer at the same time because it gives them time to save all their work and log out of the system before it shuts down. The /D option is used to provide a reason for the shutdown or the restart. Notice if we do that, we have to supply additional parameters. If we enter a P with the /D, it indicates that the restart or shutdown was planned. If we use a U instead of a P, that indicates that the reason is user-defined. If you don't enter a P or a U, then it's going to assume that the shutdown is unplanned. We can also enter a code with the /D option to indicate a major reason number for the shutdown and the restart, and a minor reason number for the shutdown or restart. The major and minor reasons are separated by a colon. If we scroll down here, you can see what those codes are. For example, to specify a hardware maintenance plan shutdown, I would use a major code of 1 and a minor code of 1. Enter /D1:1 right here to record the reason for the shutdown. Let's suppose I do need to shut this system down. I'll enter the shutdown command. Let's also suppose that I not only want to shut the system down, but I want to start it back up again. I'm going to use the /R option to reboot the system. I also want to provide a 30-second delay so that my users have an opportunity to save their work and get out of the system. I use a /T followed by the number of seconds, 30 seconds. Go ahead and press enter. We're warned that we're about to be signed out because Windows is going to shut down in less than a minute. I'll click close and the shutdown process is going to take place in 30 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording at this point. We'll come back when the system is fully rebooted. Okay, the system is now rebooted. I've logged back in and reopened my command prompt window with administrator privileges. The next set of commands we're going to look at allow you to manage processes from the command prompt. You already know that you can manage processes by using Task Manager, but you can accomplish a similar thing using commands at the command prompt. For example, let's suppose you have a process running on the system and the process is hung. You can't exit out of it and you need to kill it manually. This can be done from the command prompt. The first thing you need to do is to generate a list of running processes using the task list command. I'm going to expand out my command window here so we can see more of the output of the commands that we're going to enter. I run task list and I see a list of all the processes currently running on the system. At this point, I need to identify which one it is that I want to kill. Which process is hung? For sake of demonstration, let's assume that I loaded my Microsoft Paint program right down here, and for whatever reason, it's hung up and I need to kill it. I need to identify the process associated with Microsoft Paint, and here it is right here. Specifically, we need to identify its process ID number or PID. Right now, MS Paint has a PID number of 6340. Now that we've identified this information, we can go ahead and kill this task. I can kill it either using its image name right here, mspaint.exe, or its PID number, 6340. This is done using the task kill command. When I enter the task kill command, I have to specify which process it is that I wanted to go out and kill. One option is to kill the task by its image name. In this case, I use the /im option, followed by the image name of the process that I want to kill, which would be mspaint.exe. Or I can kill it by process ID number. In this case, I use /PID, followed by the process ID number of that process. In this case, it is 6340. Let's go ahead and press enter. Notice when I do, the MS Paint icon disappears from the taskbar because the process has been killed. This happened because a termination signal was sent to the process telling it to close. There may be times when the task kill command that we just used right here won't work. This may happen when the process is severely hung. Let's open Paint again so we have something to work with. We'll minimize it and let's run the task list command again. Because I've restarted the Paint program, it now has a different process ID number. The image name is the same, but notice that the PID is now different because it's a new process. Let's suppose that MS Paint now is severely hung up and the task kill command that we used earlier doesn't work. The task kill command we used earlier is a kind of gentle termination process. It's really the same as if I were to go up into the top right corner of the application and click. This task kill command basically sends the same signal. So if the process has really hung hard, then this command may not work. In this situation, we may need to use the force kill option with the task kill command. That's done by using the /F option with the command. Basically, /F will kill that process, whether that process wants to exit or not. This time, instead of specifying the PID number of the Paint program process, let's use the /IM option to specify its image name, which is mspaint.exe. We'll press enter, and it tells us that the process has been terminated. You'll notice that the output of the command when using the /F option is a little bit different than when you send it the gentler signal. See, up here it says send termination signal to the process with PID 6340. Basically, this command went to the process and said, if you don't mind, would you please close? And we're hoping that the process says, okay. But down here, we were a little bit rougher. We basically said, you're going to close whether you like it or not. So the output's a little different. It says, hey, that process has been terminated. In addition to managing processes from the command prompt, you can also manage remote connections. Basically, you can establish a remote desktop connection with another computer on the network from the command prompt. The command you use to do this is called mstsc. Let's go ahead and look at the help screen for mstsc. Here you can see the usage for the command. We enter mstsc/v:, and then enter the DNS name or IP address of the computer that we want to connect to. We can use the /W and /H options to specify the dimensions of the remote desktop window. You can also use the /span option to make the remote desktop window match the dimensions of the existing window on your local desktop. I click OK. So let's go ahead and establish a remote desktop session with another computer on the network. I'm going to enter mstsc again, but this time instead of /?, we use /v:, followed by the IP address of the remote host and press enter. I do have to log into the remote system. I do need to specify where that user account resides. I'm going to enter Win7. I specify the name of the computer that I'm connecting to, and I want to connect on that computer. Enter a password, click OK. We will accept the certificate from the remote computer. I've established a remote desktop session with the other computer on the network, which as you can see is a Windows 7 system. Let's go ahead and sign off from the remote computer. That's it for this demonstration. In this demo, we talked about several system commands that you can use as a system administrator from the command prompt.
All right. Yes, lots and lots of useful information. Definitely review command line, command prompts. You'll see those quite a bit sprinkled throughout your certification. All right, deep breath. Let's go into our lab. Our first lab is going to be, excuse me, according to our lesson plan, 12.1.13, which is use system commands. So in this lab, we're actually going to launch PowerShell. And I know the question was, what's the difference between PowerShell and command prompt? It's quite a bit more, PowerShell is quite a bit more robust. It's used primarily on servers to do automated work in Active Directory and services, because you can access that without any special privileges as long as you're the admin. So if you do get a chance to be to perform system admin, and you don't want to, well, essentially you can do everything in PowerShell, every single thing in PowerShell that you can do with any of the Windows managers or GUIs on the front end. So PowerShell is the back-end tool that you can use to administer your system. Okay, so in this lab, we're going to open up PowerShell and we're going to run several commands. This is just to get us a pretty good start in PowerShell. And once again, it's very, very useful information. And you will definitely see it again. Right, so the quickest way to get into PowerShell is to use your search. Just begin to type in a PowerShell, and you'll see that it looks very similar. And usually with Windows, it's a blue background with the white lettering, white text, excuse me. And of course, on the simulation, I can't really resize it, and it doesn't allow us to do any management of the window other than just maximize. There are ways to manage the window size and all that. You can manage the text size, just the same. It's exactly the same with command prompt. But first, we want to notice that we are logged in or into this system as an administrator, which means that we have access and privileges to run any type of command. And if you're logged in to your system not as an administrator, and you have privileges to run commands as an administrator, then follow what he had highlighted in the video. You just right-click upon start, and you run it as an administrator. You won't run into any issues if you do that. All right. So following the lab, we open our PowerShell window. We want to change to the E directory, and if you remember on our command prompt lab from Monday or last week, whenever it was, you type in the letter and a colon and hit enter, and it will change the drive from the C user administrator to E. All right. And we want to get a list of folders on this directory, so you can either use dir or ls. Both will work, and I'll show you that. So both will work. Both will give you a listing, and just so happen there's nothing on this drive. That's what it is showing you. So which folders are on the drive, and we can say no folders are on the drive. So we are going to make a folder, and remember the command is md or make directory, and then we want to put the folder name, which is graphics, and enter. And now we see, once we perform that, it shows us that we have a graphics folder on that drive. All right, so we want to change back to the D drive, D colon. All right, and view folders on the D drive. I'm going to use ls this time. And we see we have finances, graphics, we have a file, like a command start.config, we have a software folder, and then a batch file. That's start.bat. Pretty common. The one thing you do want to notice, you notice on the file, it is showing what time that file was created, that folder was created. So you can always check to see if there's an issue with your system and system dates based on that, the indication there. All right, so use the cd command, which is which is basically change directories to change into the graphics folder on the D drive. So cd graphics. So now we are within the graphics folder on the C drive. And now we're going to use the copy command to copy the cat.jpg, the image file, from the D graphics folder to the E graphics folder. And the copy command is source, file. So the file is .jpg. And because, oh, I said source, but because we're in the graphics folder, we don't need to indicate the source because Windows will assume that that file, that cat.jpg, is in that graphics folder, and then you place the destination with this regular excuse me, destination allocation. So it's e.graphics, and you hit enter. And if everything is typed correctly, and remember the spaces, copy cat.jpg, e.graphics, it'll just return back to the folder, and just letting you know that that file was copied. And we can do a list here. We see that file is actually there. So we want to change back to the E to see if that file was actually copied, and go back into the graphics folder just to make sure, and do a list. And lo and behold, we have that cat.jpg, and it was copied at 619. Okay, so now we want to use the NSLOOKUP. Now the NSLOOKUP, and this will be more prevalent when we get into networking, where we begin to talk about networking, DNS, and server, but it is a command that is useful. So basically, we want to use this NSLOOKUP command to find the name of our DNS server on our network. So it's very simple. You type in the NSLOOKUP command, 1P, and then the actual full path or full, well, URL. And when I say full, you don't necessarily need to, the systems are smarter now. You don't need to include the HTTP or HTTPS, anything like that. So in our case, we're going to look for the corp server dot corpnet.com according to our instructions, and we hit enter. Now what we're actually looking at is what it's actually providing a path from your computer over the network, over the internet, or basically it's your network, to this particular server. And you see that it found that a corp DC, which is a DC, it represents a domain controller, and we'll get into that once we start to our conversation about Active Directory and domain services. And then we have a non-authoritative answer, which means that we're receiving an answer from our DNS, and it provides the IP addresses of these servers, which tells me that we've reached our DNS server successfully, but we do not, essentially we have no authorities to change anything on that server. So that's the information that's provided. If you're ever asked to do a DNS lookup, the command is NSLOOKUP, and then your actual server name URL. Okay, any questions about that? We'll go into that more. Nope. Are you all still with me? Have I put anyone to sleep?
Still here.
Yes, we are here.
Okay, good. All right, good. All right, so our next command is,
the one when I type the CD graphics.
pardon me?
When I type the CD graphics, the system cannot find the path specified.
Did you create that graphics folder initially? That was way back in the beginning. On the E drive, you have to create the graphics folder. Did you do that?
Yeah, I was following the steps, and then when I type the CD graphics, it says the system cannot find the path.
So I would do an ls or a dir to make sure the folder is there. Make sure you spelled it correctly. Just do some searching on because that just means it's not, it's not finding what you typed in.
Ah,
All right, so let's
Thank you.
continue. Our next command is check disk. Check disk is actually you should run this periodically on your own system because it'll return anything that's suspicious or problematic. And basically we want to use check disk to check the file system on the D data volume. So we can even run this from our E graphics, and because we're administrators, so just type in check disk and then the path C or no D. Actually, it's the system on the D data volume. So we're just going to check the whole drive. So I just typed in check disk and then D, and then it's going to run through all of its checks and then provide us any information about, any and all information about the disk. Scrolling back up, it did indicate that this system is a FAT32, and the volume label is data for that drive. There's a warning here. The slash F parameter not specified, and that's another. The slash F, whenever you use that in command prompt or PowerShell, it's forcing the command to run, and it's forcing to perform any actions under that command. And essentially, we could use that, or you can run it without it. So in this case, it's telling us that it's running check disk in read-only mode, which means that it's not going to change anything, which is actually a good thing to do initially. If you're going to run a check disk, just run a essentially informative check disk. So it brings back information about the drive without actually attempting to resolve any issues. Stage one, examining basic file systems. Essentially, you get the file records process, file verification. So it actually goes through and reads your files, performs some checksums to make sure the file hasn't changed or still has original content. Stage two, it examine file name linkage. So basically, it'll check to see if the files are linked to anything that's malicious. Well, suspect, we'll call it. It doesn't really classify it as a malicious. It'll just indicate that it may be an issue. And then it goes through the next stage is stage three, examining security descriptors. And usually the descriptors in Windows they're pretty basic, but they are useful. So you want to make sure you pay attention to anything that's returned. So then it goes through a verification of essentially the kind of the library of the file system to make sure that there are not any issues. And then it will do a quick scan, just a basic scan of the volume, and which will provide information about disk size, et cetera, files that are on the size are quite large, et cetera, et cetera. We will receive a summary of the information, and generally it will indicate if there's something that's so the scan returned no problems, so no further action is required. If you run check disk with the slash F, if you have things essentially added to your check disk, and you can do that within the system, it'll run additional, malicious malware, deletions, or quarantines, and things like that. So it's quite useful, and I would definitely recommend running that periodically, especially if you're you're performing any type of installation. Generally, Windows will run if you have Defender enabled. Actually, you don't really need to enable it anymore. Generally, your Windows OS will run some type of defensive report for you, like a check disk. But check disk is always, that's been around forever, and it's still the most effective as far as checking your disk if you're having issues. All right. Okay, so now we're going to go into group policies, and we'll talk about group policies a little bit. What I would recommend, especially, we're not going to go a lot into Active Directory and group policies, but just to give you a brief definition, group policies are all those things that you set up as a system admin, either for your network or for individual systems. And it's based on users, it's based on computers, and basically things like password changes, wallpaper, file applications that you can install. All of this is controlled by a group policy. And generally, a system admin will program the system to issue group policies, but they will task the users at their system level to update their policies. And that's where you want to use a GP update. And it's always, if you're on a corporate network, it's always a good idea to run a GP update on your system, because it'll go out and search your Active Directory to make sure that your workstation is the most up to date. And the command is very easy. It's just GP update or GP update, and then enter. And it goes out and checks to see if there's new policies. And if there are, it'll update them. And it usually will take a few seconds. This means that there's really not anything to update, and it will give you an indication that your policies were updated or completed successfully. All right. So use GP group policy results /R to see which policies are applied. So this is kind of a detailed view. After you've run a GP update, you can see which updates were actually applied to your system. So essentially, you type in GP result and then your /R, and that's basically essentially like a report, and hit enter. And it'll give you a report within the command prompt, telling you all about your group policy results. Essentially, when the group policies were built, they were created today, and then the policies that your system were actually updated. Here's some system information: your OS configuration, your OS version, Windows 10, site name, default first site name. All of this is just generic information, local profile, etc. And then your computer settings. Basically, it lets you know essentially how your computer is set up as far as group policies. For example, the policies were applied from this gary.corpnet.local system scenario. It's probably a virtual. The link threshold is 500 kilobytes per second. Just gives you general information, but it does tell you which policies were applied to your system. This i.e. settings, you deploy printers, default domain policy, and then Outlook settings. These 4 were applied. And then it also will tell you the GPOs and group policy objects that were not applied because they were filtered out. So someone had gone in, a system admin had gone in and filtered out the policies. So these they would show here. And then you as a user is a part of the following security groups. So this local user is a part of the security groups on this system: local, programmer users, high mandatory level, which just basically mean you're an administrator. On the system, you're also recognized as an administrator over the corporate network. Any questions about that? Nope, nope. All right, so he, in the video, did talk about the command task kill. We're gonna cheat a little bit. We're gonna actually use the task manager. We can keep the PowerShell window open, but if you remember how to access the task manager, right-click on your taskbar, and it is one of your menu items here. So you can open up your task manager here, and our job is to kill. I didn't use the task manager to identify the process, and we want the process ID or the PID for the language application. Then use the task kill to stop that process. So the first thing that we see, we're in the startup tab, And the language application is a startup, which, generally you want to go through the startup tab and make sure you only have things that you want to run at startup. And I will remove most everything in a startup. But if you remember from the video, to get to the process ID, you want to go to details. And you see here, you have your process ID, and the language application, the process ID is 9973. So the command for that is task kill. Get into your command prompt, task, scroll up, kill. Now we're going to use process ID, so we need to identify that. So that's /PID. That's what we're going to use to kill that application. And you notice that it's still here, it's still enabled. And we can right click on it and disable it here, but we're going to use the PowerShell, and the process ID is 9973. Type that in, enter. You notice that it disappears from our task manager, and success send termination signal to the process ID 9973. Success. All right, phew. So from the root, use the netuse to map the P drive. And yes, you can map drives within the command prompt or PowerShell. So we're going to go to the root. And basically, we want to go back to our, let's go back to our C drive. Essentially, in this, can't move that. All right. In this example, essentially our root is our user's administrator. And so we want to map a drive. So how do we do this? So, yeah, stop doing that. Map. So how do you map a drive from command prompt? This is your chance to, what would be next? We want to map it to the personnel, the shared folder personnel. We're going to map P drive to the personnel shared folder on the core files. Okay, so you're all waiting for me.
Map.
Map, what was that? P colon.
Column.
And now we need the path to that shared folder. And this goes back a little bit. If you remember the path, you need a double slash. You need a name of the system that the shared folder is on. And we see that it's on corp files, right? And then the actual folder, which is personnel. So we're going to map the P drive to that shared folder. Now, if it's not a shared folder, we'll get an error saying unable to map. But if we hit enter, so map is not recognized as an internal. So we have the wrong command there. So who can tell me what the mapping command is in our
Net. N-E-T.
Say that again.
Net. N.
M-A-P.
N-E-T.
That's what I have. All right.
Net. N. Nanny. E. Eagle and T.
Yeah, it's not an actual command. for mapping. We haven't really gone over it. No, map will not work. The actual command is net use. And I know that's a little tricky, but no, it's not.
Use
Go ahead.
net use.
Are you guessing or do you know?
Net
The one thing about PowerShell, if it's not an actual command, the color, this is
use E.
so what's the command? Anyone get it yet? You guys are Googling fast enough.
This is
or
Carol.
file.
Google faster.
It's net, N-E-T space use.
All right, so net use is, which stands for network, use the network to map this drive letter to this folder.
And then space P.
Yeah.
No, I have it. So if you look at the screen, it's net use space P colon, and then the path to your shared folder.
Yeah.
And then the system will tell you that the command completed successfully. Yeah, the net use command, yeah, that goes way back. But you can do quite a few things with that, but it's primarily used as a mapping tool. So it's just net use, net space use space P colon space, and then your path to your shared folder. Phew. Okay, so we want to change to the P drive to make sure it was successful. And we do have the P drive, and look at the folders on the drive. So we can do an ls here, and we see that we have employee actions, employee investigations, employee reviews. And if you go to your file explorer, if you're curious about it and go into this PC, you can also see that, yeah, come on. Come on. My mouse is not activated. Wait, you can see that there's a P drive. I can expand this. We have a P drive here, which is a map drive. That's a little indication of a map drive. So we know that we did that correctly using the net use command. You don't really see this much anymore, even on PowerShell, because you can do all these within a GUI. But if you have any issues with your Windows system, and that's another thing that you might want to use PowerShell. Let's say you're having problems with your OS, and you can't get applications to start. PowerShell will start no matter what's happening with the operating system. All right, that was a lot of work.
Dwight, this is Carol. Real quick, how do you know that you had to go to the back, double backslash?
Well, you probably don't remember. That's the universal tab we did shared folders back in file management.
Okay.
And one of the videos briefly talked about the UNC path is what it's called. And it's always / the system, either a server or a PC or whatever, and then your shared folder.
All right, that makes sense.
Always name that. So I buzzed right through that. That was in our lessons on Monday. And remember that you'll see that, because that will help you tremendously to understand shared folder scenarios. All right, so let's go ahead and score this lab, and we actually passed. Did you have another question, Carol?
Nope, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, that was a lot of work. Boy, I'm tired already. Okay. So our next lab, all of the Active Directory labs. All right, so before we get into all of the Active Directory labs, I'm going to show you a couple more videos. It'll definitely help you to understand what Active Directory is, how it can be accessed, and basically, I've spent so much time in an Active Directory scenario over my illustrious career or whatever. But it is quite useful. And if you ever get a job being a system admin, this is, as a matter of fact, some of the interview questions will ask you if you know what Active Directory is, if you know how Active Directory can be connected to cloud services, things like that. And we can talk about that. But let's watch a couple of videos on Active Directory, and then we're going to do four labs. So get set, get yourself situated, comfortable, and then we're going to take a break, and then we have quite an adventure in Packet Tracer to close out the evening and close out the week. All right. Let me stop sharing there, share here. Okay. Nope, don't want that. All right, where is my, okay, here we go. The first video is 12.4.1, Active Directory Overview. All right, here we go.
In this lesson, we're going to spend some time talking about Microsoft's Active Directory service. Now, Active Directory is a centralized database that contains two things: user account information and security information. Now, recall that in a workgroup environment, as opposed to a domain environment, all of your authentication, security, management, everything takes place on each individual computer in a network. That means every single computer has to independently store its own authentication information. Now, as we talked about elsewhere in this course, this can turn into a management nightmare because duplicate sets of user accounts have to be maintained on each individual system. And if you have more than about 10 systems in the network, it becomes completely unmanageable very, very quickly. Therefore, in most modern networks, you'll likely see Microsoft's Active Directory used instead of using local user accounts in a workgroup environment. Now, using Active Directory, all of the computers in the network share the same central authentication and configuration database. For example, with Active Directory, we can define a single user account here on the domain controller. Then that one user account can be used to access any resource in the network that the user's been granted access to. For example, if this user wanted to access a shared folder on this computer over here, they don't have to authenticate to that computer directly once they've already authenticated to the domain. Likewise, if they want to send a print job to this printer over here, as long as that user has authenticated once using the domain controller right here, they can then send a print job to that network printer without re-authenticating. Now, one key advantage of using Active Directory is the fact that it is a much more complex system than workgroups. It takes, therefore, much more knowledge and experience to set it up and then to maintain it once it has been set up. Accordingly, you need to be familiar with all the various pieces and parts that comprise an Active Directory implementation. Let's take a look at what they are. The first thing we need to look at is the concept of a domain. Now, a domain is an administratively defined collection of network resources that share a common directory database and security policies. The domain essentially is the basic administrative unit of Active Directory. In essence, it's the Active Directory database. And as such, it stores our user information and our security information. In the example that you see right here, we're working with the esim.com domain. Now notice that the domain is identified using a DNS name. In this case, it's esim.com. Now sometimes we'll refer to a domain just by its domain name alone. In this case, it would just be esim. This is the common name of the domain. The distinguished name, on the other hand, includes the DNS context along with the domain. In this case, it's esim.com. Now, a domain controller is a Windows server that holds a copy of the Active Directory database. A domain can actually have multiple domain controllers, and each of the domain controllers holds a copy of the Active Directory database. Therefore, any changes that need to be made to the Active Directory database can be made to any domain controller, and then that change will be sent out to all of the other domain controllers within the domain. This process is called replication. Essentially, it involves copying any changes made to the Active Directory database between all of the domain controllers in the domain. All database information is replicated or shared within the domain. Essentially, this means that if I were to use this domain controller to create a new user account right here, then through the process of replication, that same user account would be copied over to the Active Directory databases on all of the other domain controllers in the domain. By doing this, the Active Directory database maintains consistency between all of the domain controllers. No matter what domain controller you're working with, it's going to have exactly the same information as all of the other domain controllers in the domain. Next, we need to look at organizational units. Now, an organizational unit is kind of like a folder that's used to subdivide and organize resources within the domain. Examples of organizational units are shown right here: marketing, sales, and research. Now, understand that an organizational unit is a container object. This means that it can contain other domain objects. For example, it can contain other organizational units if you wanted to nest multiple organizational units within one given organizational unit, or it can also contain other types of objects, such as user objects, computer objects, and so on. The goal behind using organizational units is to logically organize network resources within the domain and to simplify security administration. For example, if all of my users here in marketing need a similar level of access to network resources, then I can apply the necessary security policies to just the marketing organization, and then every user within that organization will receive those same policies. I don't have to go through each individual marketing user and make the same security changes over and over and over. I make it once here to the organizational unit, then everybody within that organizational unit has the same security. And if I add a new user to marketing, they will automatically receive those same security privileges without me having to manually assign it to them. If I were to take a user out of the marketing organizational unit, then they would lose whatever security privileges they received from the marketing organizational unit. Now, be aware that there's another type of container object within Active Directory. It looks like an organizational unit, but it's not. These are called built-in containers. Examples of built-in containers are right here: users, managed service accounts, computers, foreign security principals. You'll note that the icon for these containers is slightly different than that used for the OUs we looked at just a minute ago, such as research, sales, and marketing. Now, like an organizational unit, these built-in containers can contain other objects, and they're used to organize our Active Directory objects. However, these built-in containers are created by default when the domain is initially installed, and they are different from organizational units in several key ways. First of all, you cannot create a new built-in container. You can't move a built-in container. You can't rename a built-in container, nor can you delete a built-in container. For example, if I wanted to rename users to user accounts, I can't do it. In addition, they have very few editable properties. There's not much I can configure with one of these built-in containers. With organizational units, on the other hand, there's lots of things that I can configure. In addition to organizational units and built-in containers, we also have objects within Active Directory. Understand that with Active Directory, each network resource is identified as an object. For example, over here, you can see 3 user objects. I have a user object for Kim Marshall, Mary Morgan, and Ralph Roche. There are many other types of objects used within Active Directory as well. For example, you can have objects for groups, and you can have objects for computers. Now, each of these objects contains attributes. Now, these attributes represent information about that particular object. So, for example, let's suppose that we are viewing the attributes of the Ralph Roche user object. Some of the attributes associated with a user object would be the user's name, the user's phone number, the user's email address, and so on. These attributes are used for both locating and also securing network resources. Essentially, if you want someone to be able to log into the domain and access the network resources within the domain, then you've got to create a user object for them here within the domain. That's it for this lesson. In this lesson, we introduced you to Active Directory. We first talked about Active Directory domains. We talked about domain controllers. We talked about organizational units. We talked about built-in containers. And then we talked about individual objects in Active Directory.
All right, as you can see, Active Directory is quite a bit. There's a lot that you can learn about a system, about an infrastructure, based on the organization of your Active Directory. Don't try and memorize any of this. It's definitely a process to learn what Active Directory is. All right. Okay, let's one more video on Active Directory, and then we'll go into our lab adventure. Let's see. 1249 group policies. Okay.
In this lesson, we're going to introduce you to the concept of group policy. Now, one of the great benefits of using domain networking is the fact that the domain allows you to apply various configuration settings, such as security settings, across multiple Windows hosts within the domain using group policy. So let's spend a few minutes looking at what group policy is and how it works. First of all, let's talk about what a policy is. Now, a policy is a set of configuration settings. Policies can be applied to domain users as well as to domain computers. Essentially, we're able to push down configuration settings from the domain controller to individual hosts within the domain. And this is really beneficial because it prevents you as the administrator from having to go from system to system to system to system to system, making the same configuration change over and over and over. Now, collections of policies are grouped together and stored in a group policy object, or a GPO. And GPOs are very powerful. They contain a collection of settings that can be applied to all the different hosts in the domain, such as registry settings, running scripts, applying templates, setting up software, making configuration settings, and so on. An example is shown here. In this screenshot, we're editing the GPO named the default domain policy. And notice that within this policy, we have a tree structure over here, in which our group policy settings are stored. In this example, if we walk our way down the tree, we're going from computer configuration to policies to Windows settings to security settings to account policies. And within account policy, we have a group of policies that are related to passwords. And the individual policies are shown over here. For example, notice that we can enforce password history. Now you'll notice that the policy is shown right here, and then the policy setting is shown over here. In this case, enforce password history is enabled, and 24 passwords will be remembered, meaning that the end user has to use 24 unique passwords before they'll be allowed to reuse a password that they used before. Notice we also have a policy for setting the maximum password age. In other words, how long can the user use the same password before they're going to be forced to change it? Right now, that's set to 42 days. Also, we have a minimum password age set for 1 day, and the minimum password length is currently set to 7 characters. Password complexity is also enabled. And also notice that storing passwords using reversible encryption is disabled, which is a very good idea. If you ever see this policy turned on, you better have a good reason for doing it, because it makes your user accounts much less secure. We'll talk about how that works in a different lesson. So with this configuration, whenever a domain joined workstation powers on, these settings that are configured right here are going to be automatically pushed down from the domain controller to that workstation. Therefore, on each individual workstation, these various password policy settings are going to be automatically configured. You don't have to go from system to system to system throughout the network, manually making these same changes over and over and over. Now, before we go any farther, you need to understand two important concepts. First of all, any computer running Windows that is not joined to a domain will use local group policy settings. For example, its local security settings will be configured by the local security policy. That means if you have a bunch of computers on your network that aren't part of a domain, you're going to have to go from system to system to system to set up the various policy settings on each individual system, which, as you might guess, requires a lot of work. On the other hand, if your computers are joined to a domain, then both the group policy settings from the domain as well as the local group policy settings will be applied. For example, both security settings from the domain group policy as well as security settings in the local group policy will be applied. But the group policy settings from the domain will take precedence over any local settings. For example, if you have the same security settings configured in group policy in the domain and in the local group policy, then the settings from the domain will take precedence over the same setting that you configured in the local security policy on the local system. Just remember that domain group policy settings always trump local group policy settings. Now, policies within a group policy object are divided into two different categories. First, we have computer configuration, and second, we have user configuration. Now, you might be asking what the difference is between a computer configuration policy and a user configuration policy. A computer configuration policy is applied to the computer itself, meaning that no matter who logs into the computer, these settings right here are going to be applied. Group policy does not care who the individual user is. Some sample computer policies include software that should be installed on the computer, scripts that might need to be run when the system boots or shuts down, password restrictions that are going to be applied to all the user accounts on the system, also network security settings or registry settings that are going to be applied to the entire computer. The important thing to remember about computer configuration policies is the fact that they are applied as the system boots up and initially connects to the domain. They are enforced before any user actually logs on. User policies, on the other hand, are enforced for specific users. Therefore, it doesn't matter which computer the user logs in from, those policies will be applied. Accordingly, different policies can be set for different users. For example, you may have one computer system that 3 different users use. Using user policies, different settings can be applied based upon the user configuration policy set up for the individual user account. Some sample user policy settings could include the software that's installed for a specific user, scripts for a specific user that are run at log on or log off. It might also include security settings for your web browser. It could even be used to push down a list of favorites for your web browser. And it can also be used to push down registry settings that apply just to that individual user. Just remember that the key difference between user policies and computer policies is the fact that user policies are applied on a per user basis. Therefore, they're not applied until the user actually logs on, whereas computer configuration policies are applied to the entire computer system, no matter who logs on, and are therefore applied when the system initially boots up. Now, there are literally hundreds of different configuration settings that can be applied through group policy, and we can't possibly cover all of them here. However, there are a few key ones that you should probably be familiar with. First, we have account policies. You use account policies to control such things as password settings, account lockout settings, Kerberos settings, and so on. Next, we have local policies, audit policy. You use the audit policy settings to configure auditing for various events, such as log on, account management, or privilege use. Next, we have local policies, user rights assignment. User rights determine what actions a given user can perform on a given computer. We also have local policy security policies. Now, security policies are used to allow such things as allowing a user to install an unsigned driver or requiring Control-Alt-Delete to be pressed in order to log on. We can also configure registry policies. You can use registry policies to configure specific registry keys and values. They can also specify whether or not you can read or even change a specific registry value. Another set of group policies affect the file system. You can use file system policies to configure file and folder permissions that apply to multiple computers. We also have software restriction policies. You can use software restriction policies to define what software is allowed to run on any computer that's joined to the domain. Now, these software restriction policies can be applied to a specific user, or they can be applied globally to all users. And finally, we have administrative templates. Administrative templates are registry-based settings that you can configure within a group policy object. These are really, really useful. I use them all the time. Instead of editing the registry or making various configuration changes in control panel individually on every single computer in your network, you can use the settings under administrative templates within group policy to control the computer configuration and therefore centrally manage the user experience. For example, you can use administrative templates to enable and configure various Windows features such as BitLocker, offline files, or even parental controls. You can also use administrative templates to do pretty cool things like customizing the start menu or customizing the taskbar or even setting up the desktop environment. That's it for this lesson. In this lesson, we talked about group policy. We first talked about what group policy is and how policies can be used to push down configuration settings to all the computers in your domain. We talked about the relationship between group policy and local policy settings that may be configured on individual machines. We then looked at the difference between computer configuration policies and user configuration policies. And then we ended this lesson by reviewing a list of policies that you should probably be familiar with in order to effectively manage a domain.
All right, so once again, within Active Directory, group policy objects, you'll learn more and more about those, as you become familiar with how Active Directory works. And as he said, there's hundreds and hundreds of settings, but those 6 that he mentioned, and I'll show you where those, well, you should investigate where those are housed, but just remember there's, you're not going to be able, you won't be able to learn all of these in like one setting. This is quite a bit to undertake. So please don't let that worry you. All right, so we have 4 labs to complete. Just to let you know, 12.4.3, 4.6, 4.7, and 4.8. They're all pretty straightforward, but please pay close attention to these labs dealing with Active Directory because they will definitely help you. All right. So let's get started. Okay, under Active Directory, first we're going to join our workstation to a domain. So in this lab, we're going to use the PC in Office One. It's basically a standalone PC, and we're going to join it to the corpnet.com domain. And this is always an interesting part. Getting into Active Directory. Basically, Active Directory cannot impact that system if it's not a part of the domain. So the easiest way to get into our system, I would go to Control Panel. There are several ways to do it. It's usually where I would start. And under System and Security, select that. And then under System, it's the 3rd one down to System. This will give you the information about your system, Windows 10. You see that it gives you your processor and your memory, 16 gigs, 64-bit. The 3rd little section here is your computer name, domain, and workgroup setting. And you see that our computer name is Office One. Our work group or domain setting, we don't have one. We're just basically in the default work group. So the first thing you want to do is change those settings. So click on the Change Settings link, and the system properties will show. And what we want to do is rename this computer or change its domain or work group. So we want to click Change, and this will bring us to our computer name domain change. We're not going to change the computer name, we're going to keep it, but we want to change this from our work group to a domain. So you select the domain button, and then we just need to type in our domain name, the full name, corpnet.com. Yes, include the .com. because that's our domain, and click OK. And then you should be prompted to use the domain administrative account to add this computer to the domain. And so that's Jay Golden. And the password is PC Pro Rocks with the special characters PC Pro, and upper and lowercase. This is case sensitive. So it's PC Pro Rocks with an @ CKS. And then OK. Now, if you typed in everything correctly, you will receive a pop-up that says, or an indication that says, welcome to the corpnet.com domain. And yes, it will prompt you to restart because you're not actually on the domain yet until all the systems have been applied and after a restart. So let's go ahead and restart. So we want to restart and verify anyway. So we click on OK and then restart right away. You can restart later. But as soon as that system is restarted, it'll be on the domain. So we want to verify that everything changed. So I would just go back in the control panel. And the same route, system. And you see that now our computer name changed, office1.corpnet.com, and we're on the corpnet.com domain. Piece of cake, right? So let's go ahead and score that. Good job. Any questions?
Nope.
Nope, still with me? All right, so our next lab is 146. Go back. Or 1246, excuse me. We want to create user accounts. This is always an arduous. Just to mention, generally, there are scripts out there that you can create I've used them quite a bit. I've ran them in PowerShell, where you can create, thousands of accounts, but basically it'll read an Excel. Well, it'll read a comma delimited file, and it'll create all these accounts for you on the fly. I don't think we're going to run through that in this class, but I know that if you're creating several users, that's probably useful. But in our small corporation, we just have a few users, so we have to go through the arduous process of creating the users. So in this lab, we want to create these 4 users, Juan and Susan and Mark and Bori, in these departments or job roles: marketing manager, permanent sales employee, sales manager, and temporary sales employee. And so we want to follow these naming conventions. The user account should be first name, last name. The login name should be first initial, last name. The CorpNet, the domain should be added automatically. And the initial password will be 1234 ABCD $, but we're going to prompt the users to change it when they first log on. So the key here, we need to place these users under the appropriate accounts or appropriate organizational units or OUs, like the marketing manager. I'm pretty sure there's a marketing manager, OU, etc. And then one last thing, we need to configure that temp employee so that they can only log in at a certain time during the week, and their account only lasts until the end of the year. And this is very, very normal as far as setting up accounts. All right, so you notice that we're actually accessing our server, our CorpNet domain controller, or at least our CorpNet server. This is a little tricky because it launches the Hyper-V. And who remembers, what is the purpose of Hyper-V once it's enabled in Windows?
Virtual machines.
Virtual machines, yes. So I'm assuming that we have a main server, and then we have several servers that are virtual machines. So remember to access the servers, click on Corp Server, and you see that we have our domain controller, our DHCP, and our file server, which is very, very common for a virtual scenario. So we have all of these running virtually, and then underneath our main server using Hyper-V. So we know that all the servers are running because these services need to be made available. So we can click on our domain controller or double click, and it should give us a domain controller desktop, which looks very similar to our, but remember, this is a virtual machine on our main machine. So let's go ahead and get into or access our Active Directory. We're going to be doing this a lot, so please remember. So under Tools, on our navigation at the top, you'll see all of the Active Directory services. Now, just before we get into those, on your desktop or on your server manager, you will see an indication of the services that are running. These little tiles. You should have ADDS, that's Active Directory Domain Services. That's the one that you should always ensure that that's green and it's actually running. Because if you don't have that running, then you won't have access to Active Directory. All right, so under Tools, we want to access Active Directory users and computers, since we're creating users, and that's generally the area that you want to, well, you generally do most of the work there. So we see, if we look at our tree structure, we have our domain, and we actually have several OUs here. And remember, the OUs are the ones with the little, the different folder with the little kind of label on it. And then the built-in ones are just the plain folders. And there is a users one. It's just a built-in, and that's usually default users. If you open that up, you'll see that there may be users in here. There may be some initial users in here. And technically, you can create the users here and move them to your OU, but I think that's a waste of energy. I really don't need to do that. I would go directly to the OU to create your users, and this is how you do that. So for Juan, he's a marketing manager. You notice we have a marketing OU. And remember, with OU, you can have sub-OUs. So under the marketing manager, if you expand it, or under the marketing OU, if you expand it, you have a marketing manager OU. So we want to create Juan as a user right in that OU. So you right-click, and there's a selection of new. And of course, it's not showing.
Dwight, quick question. How did you get into the Active Directory?
How do you get into Active Directory? Okay.
Yes.
Let me go back. All right. All right, so make sure you're launching your domain controller OU, and that's Corp DC. So double click on that. That will take you to the, of course, the simulation is all screwed up, so I'll have to kind of start over. I'll need to start over. That's one thing about this. This won't happen to a real server. So make sure you go to your Hyper-V. Your Corp server is running virtual servers. Double click on the corporate domain controller. It'll take you to the domain controller desktop. All right, and the domain controller server manager dashboard. So you want to click on Tools, Active Directory, Users, and Computers.
Okay.
And that will take you to the Active Directory Users and Computers Management Console.
Okay.
And generally, this is where you want to do, this is where you will do most of your work in Active Directory. All right.
Thank you.
Yep. So then you want to expand your corp.net or your domain in the left pane. And our first user is Juan, the marketing manager. So expand the marketing OU, and you have a marketing manager's OU. Right click on that OU, select new, and if you scroll down in here, you see that there's a user selection. So that's right click new user, and it will bring up the user new user object prompt. So we want to go ahead and type in Juan Suarez, right? That's our naming convention, and it'll default his full name. And his login is first initial, right, and last name. And then you have your domain here. You shouldn't have to change any of that, right? And you click next, and then we type in our password. And remember that's, where is it? Right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $, 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $, and you have to confirm it. 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $, and make sure this top password prompt is checked, because we don't want that very unsecure password to stay in there. So we're prompting the users to change it once they log on their first login. So when you click next, if everything is typed in correctly, you get a summary screen and then finish. And you notice that Juan is now a user in that OU. Okay. So now we have to add 3 more users in their appropriate OUs. So Susan is in the permanent sales employee. So that's probably under sales, and there's a permanent sales OU. Right click, new user, Susan Smith, and S. Smith, right? Next, password, 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $, and again, ABCD, $. Make sure that's checked. Next, summary, and finish. All right, we're getting this done. Now we have a sales manager, still under sales. We have a sales manager sub OU. Right click, new user, and that's Mark Burns. Mark Burns with an E. Oops. And that's M. Burns. All right. Next. Oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $. 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $. Next, and finish. Phew. All right, so now, last but not least, we have a temp employee. Down. All right, it's not. So let's compress our sales folder. Now, do we have a temp folder?
There was a temp sales under sales.
Ah, but it's under sales. Thank you. There's a temp sales, which is what he is. Bori is a temp sales employee. So same thing here. New user, Bori Chan. B Chan. Next. 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $. 1, 2, 3, 4, ABCD, $. Has to change. Next, and finish. All right, we've added all of those users. Great. We have some conditions that we have to set for our temp for Bori. We have to make sure that he can only log in during the week from 8 to 5, and his account only lasts until the end of the year. So within the OU, we have him up, right click, and bring up properties. All right, and you see several tabs in here that you can control what Bori can do, and you can add additional information if you want, but don't do that. So under account, you see that there's specifics. Oops, I want to change those. There's log on hours. There's a log on hours button. You click that, it brings up this nice little grid graph. So and this is basically stating that he can log on all the time or every day, but you notice that it says log on permitted, log on denied. The good thing about is you can left click and highlight all the items that you want to change, and then just click the radio button and it will make that change. So we're going to immediately take off the weekend. And then 8 to 5 is right there. You can check it too. It gives you an indication. See, that's 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. there. So you just highlight the rest of the day and then all of the week in one fell swoop, boom, that's gone. And then also on this side, so you want to go till 8. See, it's 12 to 8 right there.
How are you changing the hours?
Pardon?
How are you changing the hours?
Left click, hold, and drag.
And then delete?
And then, no, not delete. You just select this radio button here where it says log on denied. Okay. So once you've highlighted what you want to change, then you click the login denied.
Okay.
So you should end up with this area that's only Monday through Friday. And if you just highlight it just to check, you see that that's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Okay. So your ending should look, your end hours as far as access should look like this. And then you just click OK, right? And then the last thing we want to do is we want the account to expire, right, on December 31st. So you change the never to end of, as of, and then it's the calendar. So click on the little calendar and you can navigate to the end of the year, December 31st, Thursday, apply, all of that, and OK. So now Bori, he's all set up and he can log on any computer and domain, but he can only log on from 8 to 5 during the week. Other questions? All right, let's go ahead and score that lab.
Yes, just one more question.
Go ahead.
How do we change the date?
How did I change the date? Well, you click on the radio button that it says never or end of. You change the radio button to end of, and then there's a tiny little calendar icon in the right of that form box. You click on that, it'll show you a calendar.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then you can just navigate, use the left arrow to navigate the months, navigate down up to December, and then select 31st.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay. All right, so that was 12.4.6. So now we're going to 12.4.7. We're going to create some OUs. All right. All right, so we have a lot of OUs to create. We thought
Wait, this is Carol. I'm just trying to finish up that one lab. I'm just wondering if you can.
Pardon?
I'm wondering if you could just give us a chance, give me a chance just to catch up to that.
Oh, okay. Should I go through it again or go through the last part?
Oh, no, I'm just trying to finish that one, that last one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So in this lab, we're going to actually create organizational units in our Active Directory, or OUs, they're commonly referred to. And there's a bunch of them: accounting, admin, marketing, research and development, sales, servers, support workstations. And then we're going to create some sub-OUs under sales, sales managers, and temp sales. Creating OUs is really actually pretty easy. So once again, we know that our domain controller, and that's the key here, is usually the server that that houses Active Directory. You want to go ahead and launch that in your virtual machines. And then go ahead and access Active Directory tools, Active Directory users and computers, again, to get into your domain. And here's our domain. And remember, in our domain, we have some built-in, not necessarily organizational units, they're just built-in directory, built-in folder structures. But we want to make sure we're building these OUs at the domain, under the domain hierarchy. So make sure you click on or right click on the domain, all right? Right click on the domain and then new, that's your friend, and then organizational unit.
I'm sorry, can you go back a bit?
All right,
So
how far?
just to where you actually got to the corporate
So remember,
directory.
once you've accessed users and computers, this is your domain, corpnet.com. So you want to just right click on the domain. You don't have to expand it. Right click on the domain, right click. And new and organizational unit.
So I right click on a domain and a new, and I'm getting virtual machines for some reason.
No, you're on the Hyper-V. Make sure you're in.
Oh, the DC?
You want to launch the domain controller, DC, and then launch the Active Directory users and computers to get to your, it'll say, remember, you're looking at the virtual machine. You want to make sure you're in Active Directory. In this view, it's very hard. We can't really maximize it. So you want to make sure you're on Active Directory users and computers.
So, okay, I'm sorry.
Are you there, or should I start over?
Could you start over? I'm sorry.
It's the same as we did before. So in Hyper-V, which is your virtual machines, you want to highlight your corp server.
Right.
You want to double click, double left click your corporate DC, launch that desktop. And it's within, see, this is your corp, see, it's within that, your corporate server. So I just maximize it, and it should say server manager.
Right.
Right? So
right.
Here, we make sure we're on the server, the DC. So within the DC, tools, Active Directory users and computers. Are you with me?
Active Directory users and computers. Okay.
The same thing, that's where we're going to go in all of these labs. So it's the same process. And the view should look like this. You should have Active Directory users and computers, and then your domain name, and then save queries, and then your corpnet, which is your domain.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And then you right click on your domain, and then you select new, and then organizational units. Oops. Right click, new, organizational units. And this will launch your new object window to name your first organizational unit, and that's accounting. And we do want to protect a container from accidental deletion. So, and that's key. I mean, it creates a kind of an interesting journey for deleting, but it will protect you in the long run. And then you just click OK. And you see that organizational unit is created here, accounting. And then it's alpha order under your domain. So we want to go ahead and do that for all of these domains, these 8. So I'm just going to go ahead. Remember, you want to right click on the domain and select new organizational unit. The next one is admins. Okay. There it is. Right click, new organizational unit, marketing. Okay. And it's way down here. right click, new, OU, research and development. Okay. There. Right click, new, OU, sales. Right click, new, OU, servers. Right click, new, OU, support. And finally, right click, new, OU, and workstations. All right. So you should have those 8 organizational units created from at the domain level within your Active Directory computers and users infrastructure. So we want to add 2 additional sub OUs under sales. We want to create sales managers and temp sales. So all you need to do is exactly the same process. Right click on sales now, new, organizational unit. And our first one is sales managers. And we want to protect it and okay. And you see that it shows right under sales. And then right click again, new, organizational unit, temp sales. Okay. And there we are. So we have all of our OUs in there and all of our 2 sub OUs under sales. Good?
Good.
All right. So let's make sure we score that. And it looks like we passed. All right. All right, so now the real adventure. We want to delete OUs. And you're probably thinking, that shouldn't be too hard. We just right click it and delete it. Well,
Says I don't have permissions, Dwight.
well, let's see. So the purposes of this lab in the marketing OU, we want to delete the workstation OU. In the research, we want to delete the workstation OU. So let's go back to our domain controller. Back to Active Directory. Expand our domain. All right, so we're saying under marketing, if we expand that, we have these 5 or 4, so we want to delete workstation. So I'm thinking I can just right click and find it, oops, cancel. Right click, find a delete, and it gives you a warning. Are you sure you want to delete this OU? Yes. No, you do not have sufficient privileges, or the object is protected from accidental deletion. So it's the second. We know we're the admin, so we have sufficient privileges. That's not the issue. But remember, we checked the box to protect this from deletion. So this requires us to do something else before we can even do that. We have to go into the View tab under at the top of your Active Directory users and computers. We want to go into Advanced Features, okay, or Enable Advanced Features. All right. All that does is it pulls it from the basic features into an Advanced Features view. So So you think, well, can we delete it there? Well, not quite. So you have to go to that OU that you want to delete. And then, so right click, don't try and delete it. You'll get the same error message. It just, all you did was enable the advanced features. Click on the properties. And then you want to go into the object tab. And you see that we have that protection prompt checkbox. You want to uncheck that box. That's the protection against accidental deletion. Apply and OK. And now you can delete it. Right click, delete. Yes, gone. So that's a lot, but that's the only way that you can delete an object once you have it protected. Okay, so we have to delete the workstation under research and development. So
How did you do that again? So with the,
yeah, I'll go through it again with this
Okay.
one. So under research and development, expand, and you'll still right click. See, we are in advanced features.
okay,
So right click on the OU, go into properties or select properties, right? Once you've selected properties, come on. You get this view, you want to go into the object tab. And in the object tab, you have that checkbox, protect object from accidental deletion. You want to uncheck it. Click apply and OK. And now you can right click, delete it. Right click, delete. Yes. All right. Okay, and we have one more under sales. So I'll show you if you don't change if you don't change the properties, you just can't delete it. So right click, properties, object tab, uncheck, apply, okay. And now right click, delete. Yes. Boom. Did we get that? Oops.
Yep, got it.
Got it?
Yes.
All right. Good job. That was a lot to do in the Active Directory. And believe me, I've spent hours and hours and hours as a system admin, changing passwords, deleting organizational units, adding computers. It's a full-time job, although a lot of it's automated now. So, okay, any questions?
All good.
Y'all made it through that?
Yes.
All right, so let's take a 25-minute break. 24, 25. We'll start up again at 10 after 8. All right, 8:10 is our startup time. I'm gonna pause the recording. All right, are we back? Are we still clicking, still alive? How's it going? Get through those labs okay?
Dwight?
Yes.
This is Hallie Lax talking, speaking. The packet tracer. I tried to allocate the numbers about 20 times. I still didn't succeed. I tried to unplug and replug it, delete it and start it fresh. I still couldn't get the number.
Did you start from scratch? Or?
I did for the 2 phones. I did. So the ones the homework I submitted to you had one of the numbers allocated. I deleted both and started afresh, and now I can't get any.
Well, you may have to start from scratch with the router. That's the drawback of the simulation. So that's what I recommend. And believe, we're not going to do a whole lot more today. I just wanted to review a couple things, and we'll add we'll add a couple, and then I'll tell you what I'm wanting you to accomplish. But before we get started, I want you all to take a little bit of a poll. So please rate your packet tracer experience thus far. So I don't get it. Is this networking? You're struggling and it's not making much sense. Struggling, but you do understand, or you got this, bring on the NOC. And a NOC is a network operations center. So go ahead and take a few seconds for this poll. And I just want to gauge where you're at, kind of get your interpretation. So just select the radio button and submit. And then I'll just evaluate where you all saw it, right? You all saw the poll?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just give a few more seconds for that. All right, where are we? Did you all vote? Let's see what the results looks like. Oh, look at that. So, or at least we don't have any in the bottom two selections. And struggling, but you do understand is the best. I'm glad that that's most of the percentages. And some of you are confident enough that you want to work in a network operations center. So thank you. So you're all getting it to some degree, and that's good. And if you're struggling, then that's the best way to learn. All right. So we're going to continue to enhance your struggles. Let me just share my screen and show you what I would like for you to end up with. Oh, wait, let me share the my desktop. So all right. So this looks interesting, right? And this is all the components that we just worked on with a couple additions. We're going to organize our network because this will be very, very important once we get into networking, more of the detailed networking. We're going to do a couple things, and I want you to work on I want you to work on Office One today. As you see, I've changed the IP addresses. I've changed the third octet on all of your end devices to .20, and there's going to be a reason for that. So all of the devices in here should be .20, and then whatever your last octet was. So 192.168.20.102, for example, is the printer. So I don't want you to change any of the devices in Office One, and I want you to label this Office One, and I'll show you how to do that. And then essentially change the labeling for your devices like Office One smartphone, Office One wireless, Office One tablet, Office One printer, etc. And then take two of your IP phones. Basically, two of the phones will be in Office One. You're going to add an additional Office IP phone to Office 2, and Office 2 is the wireless printer, the wireless laptop. You're going to add an additional Office phone or IP phone there, and then you have the other wired laptop with your access point, and you have an access point. So it's Office 1 access point, Office 2, and then your temp office is changing a little bit. And in fact, you're going to take and you remember we have two IP phones here. We're going to disconnect one from the hub and then connect it directly to the telephony switch and place it in Office And that will represent a challenge. I'll tell you this right now, and we'll get to that. It's a specific challenge when you place it in a different location. It should receive its IP address, but once again, the phone number may be a challenge. And don't worry about that too much now, because there's a specific thing that you have to do to the router. But if you're adventurous enough, you can possibly just configure the router after you place all your devices, which is okay. But it's just a little bit of work, and it gets you to practice on configuring that DHCP on the router for telephony. And hopefully you all remember that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. And then we're also adding a reception. And these are all new devices. We're putting in a reception PC, a reception printer, and we're going to add an IP phone, which is what we're going to call IT and reception in the reception area. And then we have our temp office with the wired PC and wired laptop. And you're also going to add what I'm going to call the IT laptop. And it's going to be wireless. And I'm going to initially connect it, or you should initially connect it to the Office 2 access point. But this is an IT wireless laptop, so they're going to be all over the building. So sometimes they'll be connected here. Sometimes you'll have to reconfigure it to connect over here. And sometimes you may even have to change everything and plug it in. This is going to be a roaming device, so it can be anywhere. So to summarize, the additional components that I need for you to configure, and don't really worry about the IP addresses, except for Office 1. I want you to change Office 1 to be .20, whatever. But I do want you to add a printer, a PC, and we'll go through this together, what I want you to accomplish today for your 6. And adding the little, I'm going to have you all work on adding the little colored blocks. I want you to investigate Packet Tracer. You'll be doing a lot of this. And basically it's this, we're going to draw a rectangle, and it's a rectangle pop-up. And basically you can fill colors or no colors. I'm not going to show you how to do that, but I do want you to end up with something like this. But I want you to investigate how that works. I mean, that's just an exercise and just attempting to figure it out. All right, so what I want you to do now, I've already configured mine, but go ahead, excuse me, and just add the end devices. Let me go ahead and delete so we can do this together. My devices here, so I'm going to delete my.
Dwight, this is Carol. I guess I'm kind of overwhelmed, to be honest with you.
Okay, Carol, how are you overwhelmed?
All right. So I guess a couple of things as far as from my perspective, just seeing stuff on the page. My screen's really small next to yours.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a way to work with the information or. Right.
So.
I'm trying to work side by side with your screen and.
Oh, I see. Well, I would suggest, I mean, there's nothing on this screen right now that you should not have already, except for the laptop. You should have all of these devices within your 5th iteration of your Packet Tracer assignment, right? And then take the laptop out. Right, you have all of this, but all the colored squares, and I can take those out too because
No, the squares are fine. The
It's
color.
all saved. So this should not be anything new, right? All I did was reposition the IP phones and essentially unplugged one from here and placed it here, and then added a new one. So what,
I guess so you're saying to rename some of them and the letters real small. Okay.
okay, all right. Let me blow this up a little bit. All right, the first thing I want you to do, and I'm not really worried about this, you can check the video, but we're gonna begin to organize it as opposed to first and second and all that. We're gonna start with the Office One devices. We're gonna label this area Office One, which are the 2 original PCs, the 2 IP phones, and then the wireless, the smartphone, the smart laptop, and the tablet, and then the printer. That's essentially where we started, and then with your switch. So all we're doing here is just relabeling all these, and to relabel them, you can click on the label and then just, modify the name and the IP address.
Okay.
All right. So, the access point, all of the PCs, et cetera, you're just going to relabel everything so that it's Office One. So you have Office 1-1 PC, Office 1-2 PC, et cetera, with the IP addresses. Office 1-2 IP phone, et cetera. So all I
And you
want you
said
to do is just relabel all of that so that we know it's a part of Office One.
so we're changing the 0 to a 20, you're saying now?
Yes, so all you're doing is changing the 0 to 20, and you'll need to reconfigure your devices. Now, I will let you all do that. You're not changing the gateway, you're just reconfiguring the devices so the third octet is 20 as opposed to 0. And you see that when you hover over that device, you see it has the 192.168.20.105, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So this is just an organizational exercise. You're reconfiguring and you're organizing at the same time. So in essence, for example, we can relabel. This was first access point. All I did was relabel it Office One access point.
Do we need to do anything as far as like the first router too?
Okay, well, eventually, but we're not worried about the router. Leave the router and the switch. I'm not worried about labeling them now. So all I want you to do is relabel and organize Office, what we're labeling as Office One.
Okay, thank you.
So all of that, the router and switch is not changing. We're reconfiguring the devices so that we're changing the third octet. And with that change, you need to make sure that you can each of the devices can access the printer. So yes, you will have to check to see if, like for example, the first PC, run a ping. And remember, it's 192.168.20.102, and you should get a reply. And there's a specific reason why we're doing this, and you'll learn that once we get into more of the detailed networking and we start the conversation about VLANs and all that. Now your IP phones should not change. You're just repositioning them. Your first 2 IP phones, you're just repositioning them into Office One. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes, no? How we doing? Too much work?
Yes. Maybe.
Don't say maybe, not that much work. When it's, so when you turn on your 6th iteration, for now, I just wanted to have the reorganization of Office One.
So Dwight, really quick, this is Danielle. What Office One has to consist of what? The
Office-
smartphone, the laptop, the tablet, the access point, the printer, and and a laptop, and then two phones.
Okay, Office One, and at the bare minimum, I want the devices to be 2 PCs, 2 IP phones, and then a printer, and then an access point and 3 wireless devices, a smartphone, a laptop, and a tablet. That's Office
Oh.
One.
Okay, yeah, because I have the wireless smartphone, the wireless laptop, and the wireless tablet.
Uh-huh.
And then what else? The access point.
The access point, 2 PCs, 1 printer, and 2 IP phones.
2 PCs, 1 printer. Okay. And then just 1 laptop or 2? Just 1.
Just one wireless laptop.
Okay, awesome. So I'll move that one out of the way then. Perfect.
All right. So in my picture, Office One is all the end devices are in green.
And then real quick, where did you get the phones from? Did you just take them from the telephony switch or telephony switch?
Right. Remember, we had you had at least 4 phones configured, right?
Yes.
So you're just pulling the first 2 off of the telephony switch and placing them in Office One. You see that here's our telephony closet, we're calling it. And we're just pulling 2 of the phones and rewiring them.
So just put them over there in Office too.
So you're just positioning, yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now, these phones should all still have their IP addresses and their phones, so that's 54001 and 54002. Those should not change. And you should still keep 54003 in the temp office, but 54004, you're going to do that's where you're going to use your knowledge of configuring the phone to reposition that, but I'm not worried about that yet. We're going to go over that next week. But I do want you well, after you configure Office One, I do want you to add for now, just add 2 devices, the PC and a printer, and label it reception. Reception PC, reception printer. So on your,
In what office was that? I'm sorry.
no, they're going to be their own little, this is your receptionist. So you can I'm going to place mine up here, just in this blank area here.
And you said a PC and a printer?
So you just want a PC, and we're going to label that reception PC.
And then really quick, everything in Office One, the IP address needs to be the 20, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything has to be changed to .20 whatever. So you're just changing the third octet from 0 to 20. Okay, so for your reception, we want a PC and a printer. And we want to give the PC. The IP address for your reception PC is going to be .100. So that's 192.168.100. And I'm going to go with, oh, sorry, Angel. There you go. Yeah, I don't know when you guys disconnect. So, oops. So I'm just going to go with 101. So 192.168.100.101 for the PC, and the reception printer is going to be 192.168.100.102. It kind of follows our printing IP assignment. So I want you to go ahead and add those. And then obviously we want to configure our PC, and you should all know how to do this. The gateway is always the same in our little corporate network. That will not change even when we go into different configuration. And then remember, you have to configure your IPv4.100.101 with your subnet mask. And that's good. And then our printer, the same thing. And it's just a wired printer. Our gateway. And our fast Ethernet. 100.102. So we're good there. And then connect those to your corporate or office or first switch. You're eventually going to rename that main switch. And then you need to make sure that the PC is, the reception PC is communicating with the reception printer. Go ahead. And you can choose any of the fast Ethernet ports on the main switch. And the same with your printer. And you want to make sure that those are, the configuration setup goes from amber to green. And once they're to green, go ahead and make sure you can communicate with the printer. With our good old ping. 102. So our receptionist is going to be happy. They can print. So then we're going to label that our receptionist, and eventually we will set up a phone for them, which is the next challenge. I already have mine set up, but you will add a 5th phone to your environment coming from the telephony, and that will be the IT reception phone. And it should be configured with the number 54005. But that's going to be kind of a challenge. I'll tell, and I will tell you why, because once you remove this 54004 phone, it makes the telephony, it changes the whole situational condition of the router. And we have to do some interesting kind of backwards things to make sure that everything will come up like it's supposed to. But I'm going to save that. I'm going to save the 2 additional try and fact, the way the simulation works, I mean, it's only going to support five phones with our route, with our 2811 anyway. So we're only going to configure 5 phones. The problem is once you disconnect that third phone or fourth phone, whichever way you view it, then it changes the way somewhat, depending on how you connect it. Now, it shouldn't be I'll just warn you right now, it shouldn't be a big deal. You can remove the phone, but once you remove, well, I'll just tell you this, once you remove the phone, you don't delete the database that's stored on the router. I'll just give you that hint. So you have to do some things to make sure the phone will come back up with a number, but it will start with the router. And believe me, and I've done this before, even if you have to dump the configuration of the router by deleting it and reconfigure it, that's actually not a bad thing to do, because that takes less time to get those phones all back up with their correct numbers. And that's probably the biggest hint. But don't worry about that. We're going to work on that next week. I do want you to ensure that your Office One, and you don't have to label it until you figure out exactly how to manipulate this packet tracer labeling scenario. It's a lot of fun, including the little block and the color. But I do want all the devices, except for the IP phones, to be configured with that .20 whatever it is that you have, and make sure that those devices still can communicate with the printer.
Hey, Dwight, really quick.
Go ahead, Diane.
The gateway for the reception printer or the PC, it's the first router, right?
Yeah, that's always our gateway.
Okay.
For a small network. Everything that we add to the network, that is always our gateway. And there's a specific reason for that. You'll learn that, how that works.
Wait.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Right, this is Robert.
Hey, Robert.
So the phones, we're not actually doing anything disconnecting them from the hub today?
No, don't worry about the phones too much now. But I know there's some issues, and believe me, I had to reconfigure everything to get mine to work. Remember, it wasn't working, so I had to start from scratch, and I just did one thing at a time. And it's a nuance of the packet tracer, but I mean, that's good practice. You learn those commands, and it'll help you to learn about telephony and how it works, because it does actually work that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So once again, what I would like for you to submit for your six packet tracer assignment, and as usual, it's not, you don't have to submit it tonight. I mean, we're going to end in a few minutes. I want to see that Office One is configured, and I want to see that you've added successfully the PC and the printer for your reception area.
Wait, is there a way to get like a screenshot of that, just the whole layout?
Yes. I can get a screenshot of it'll be small though. What, do you want a screenshot of the whole thing?
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Are you able to email it with our, so we look at it properly?
Okay, I can email it. You can view the video obviously, but I'll take a screenshot of the whole layout. Although I'll take a screenshot of what I want you to end up with. So let me do that, and I will send that out with the video link. Okay?
Sounds good.
Does that sound okay?
Yes.
And it'll show you, and you can resize it, etc. Zoom in, zoom out. It'll show you all the things that I'm expecting, including the configuration. Now,
Everyone just let me sleep in there, huh?
pardon?
Sorry, Dwight.
Oh, okay. So I will reiterate one more time. For this next submission, You shouldn't change anything. I just want you to configure and structure your Office One and make sure everything is changed to the .20, and then add the 2 devices for now for your reception, PC and printer. Connect them to your switch and make sure they are communicating with the .100 IP address configuration. Make sense?
Yes.
All right. And as I said, I'll send out a screenshot of the entire little corporate network. And please don't sweat on this. Basically, we're gonna go through, unless you're an overachiever, maybe Stacy will get it done. But we will finish all of the structure of our network, because we're going to do a lot with it once we go into networking in a couple weeks. But this is kind of the baseline. All right?
Okay.
Okay. So any other questions? Yeah, I think that's enough torture for tonight. So, so work on your packet tracer, send that in, and I will send out the video and the screenshot of the entire network. All right.